Thanks everyone for coming, some of my students and some other people. So the topic is global learning, bringing the world to WOU students. We're going to be, that's pretty general. There's a lot that we could cover, but so I'm going to start with some bigger ideas, but then we're going to get down to some linguistics, because I am a linguist, and we're going to do some linguistics. Okay. So, oh, and by way of introduction, some of you, if you're in one of my classes, you probably know this, but most of you are not. So I grew up in Oregon. For the first half of my life, I was not the poster child for globalization. I grew up in Amity, Oregon. I did my bachelor's degree here at Western Oregon University. I graduated with a teaching degree, and I went back and I was a high school English teacher at Amity, Oregon. And I did my master's degree here at Western. And so it wasn't until I was about 25 that I started traveling abroad. 3 or 4 week vacations, backpacking through different countries. And then after I finished my master's degree, I left Amity High School and I went to Egypt. I taught for a year in Cairo, taught high school English at an international school in Cairo. And after that, I went to Thailand for 7 years. The first half of that time, I was teaching at an international school. The second half, I was working on my PhD at Chulalongkorn University. That gave me, those experiences living abroad gave me the opportunity to travel a lot in nearby countries. And now, as a linguist, I study how English is used around the world, and I go to international conferences. I have colleagues in several countries that I communicate with regularly. So all of that internationalization really happened because of my experience at Western Oregon University. To begin kind of broad, at Western, we recently worked on revising our strategic plan, and that includes the mission of the university and our values. If I click on this link, it would take you to this page. So you can go and look at the university mission, values, and purpose. So there's a mission. Especially under values, there are several values listed: accessibility, accountability, collaboration, community, diversity and respect, empowerment, excellence, sustainability, and stewardship. So I'm particularly interested in 2 of those: community and diversity and respect. So our mission and our values are guided by these values in community: trustworthy, caring, safe environment for the cultivation of peace, civility, and social justice, connections extending beyond the classroom, across campus, and into our local and global communities. And then diversity and respect: equity and inclusion, a fundamental basis in human diversity, appreciation for the complexity of the world, strength drawn from our variety of backgrounds, abilities, cultural experiences, identities, knowledge, domains, and means of expression. So I want us to take, just to kind of get everybody here thinking, in similar ways, I want us to consider a couple of questions. One, what is a global community? I mean, if we look at this, we can see we have communities extending beyond the classroom across campus, right? That's easy to understand. The campus community is everyone who is involved in the campus. Our local community, including Monmouth and Independence. But what is a global community? And then there's a pretty good definition of diversity here, but why should we respect diversity? What's the rationale for that? I mean, maybe it's not necessary. So I'm going to give all of you a couple of minutes, maybe about 5 minutes, maybe talk with the person next to you. And so try to come up with an answer to this question: what is a global community? And why should we respect diversity? Okay, so it's 6:05. I'll give you 5 minutes to discuss that, and then I'll write down some answers on the paper over there. Okay. So, I sense kind of a lull. Have you guys come up with some ideas? So, question number 1: what is a global community? Yeah.
Everyone involved everywhere in the world.
Okay, so how does that happen? How does everyone, and everyone everywhere might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but a lot of people in a lot of places is definitely reasonable. How does that happen? Yeah.
We were talking on social media.
Mm-hmm. Technology has definitely changed globalization. We are a much smaller planet because of it. Yeah.
Global industries, so companies spreading across the nations and countries.
Global flows of goods, people, products, services, information. Yeah, it's very, very significant. Any other ideas? What is a global community? Does that capture it? Everybody, everywhere, involved? I like the word involved because it's not just connected. Involved has a sense of doing something together, of communicating. So, why should we respect diversity? Any ideas? Yeah.
We can learn from others.
Great answer. Anybody else? Yeah?
We can help each other out.
Okay. You guys are my kind of crowd. Anything else? Sue?
I would say diversity makes our community stronger,
Mm-hmm.
better able to do more things.
So you can kind of see how these two lead to this. When we learn from each other, when we help each other, our communities are stronger. Okay. I'll leave it at that. That's a great place to start. I was going to show you this as you were brainstorming, but I kind of forgot. This is a timeline of world history, starting from about 3000 BC, and so you can see there's ancient Egypt, and then the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and then here we are today. Superimposed on the top of this timeline of world history is a graph of world population. And actually, this is not to scale. The 7 billion would be about double the height of what you'd see here in order for it to be to scale. So does that make you think of your answers here in a different way? Or how can thinking of world history and the rise of nation states, all these individual nation states and the rise of population, how does that make global community and respect for diversity more significant to us? Yeah.
Well, with the more that we learned with technology and whatnot, and the more we advanced and learned about each other, the more we had to live with each other.
The more we have to live with each other. Yeah. This rise in population makes it imperative that we learn to live together better. There are 7 billion of us, and that has happened in about the last 200 years. This chart, which is very similar, this is actually a chart of the growth of my household. It's very similar, isn't it? So this was me for about my adult bachelor life, and then I got married, and then we had kids. Notice it's kind of the same curve. I originally meant that kind of as a joke, but I thought about it, and any family that grows with a couple of kids or people moving in is going to experience some growing pains, is going to have to learn how to live with each other. And that's what we are experiencing on a global level. So, in addition to our values reflecting values in community and respect for diversity, we also have undergraduate learning outcomes. And one of those learning outcomes is diversity, which is intercultural knowledge and competency and global learning. So these are things that we expect students to get from a general education at Western. But I'm really more concerned with some nuts and bolts. It's essential, while it's essential to endorse global community diversity and respect, right, at a larger administrative kind of policy level, promoting an idea, right, writing a mission statement is kind of like sitting in an office looking out at the world. What I'm more interested in is how we engage in interaction that leads people to perceive and understand the world from a different perspective. So as a linguist, I'm interested in some of the nuts and bolts of how we understand each other when we're communicating, and especially when we communicate with people who are different. There was a great article that came out just last week in the Chronicle of Higher Education called Seek Out Strangers. Dan Everett, by the way, is at the center of one of the biggest linguistic controversies of probably the last 20 years. Probably one of the biggest controversies in linguistics since the 1950s and 60s, the Chomsky Revolution. But I'm not going to go into that. I could go into that forever, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to read the first paragraph and a little bit of the third. So this is what Dan Everett, a linguist who has for years lived in other countries studying other languages. He says, "In a Piraha village along the Maisi River in Brazil, I squeezed mustard onto a piece of bread. An old woman from the village watched me. 'Why do you eat bird shit?' she asked. There was irritation in her voice. Then I looked at her more closely. My curious inquirer was sucking the brains out of a roasted rat head." It's the kind of thing that linguists abroad deal with, right? I don't have to deal with these things. "There was novelty in what we were seeing, diverse perspectives. We had stumbled upon the necessary condition for all learning." Let's jump down to the third paragraph, or the fourth paragraph. "This principle of learning applies to conceptual and cultural learning as well. It is harder to learn things from people like ourselves. Say, someone who grew up with us in our neighborhood, from our ethnic background and our gender. We already know most of what each other knows." See, that gets exactly to this reason for respecting diversity. We can learn from others because people who are different from us can teach us. Okay, so please take that article home and read the whole. It's only 4 pages. It's pretty fast to read. It's entertaining. It's a great article. So it's by a linguist. I'm a linguist. I studied linguistics at Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. I mainly studied what we call world Englishes, and that's the way English has spread around the globe in the last few hundred years and been adapted to different places. One of the most well-known theories related to this is Braj Kachu's circles of English. So we have what's called the inner circle of English. These are countries where English has been for a long time. There's standard English used in these places: the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. You know, we have our own recognized international dialects and versions of English. Then there's the outer circle. These are places where English has an official status. English is an official language in all of these countries. And if you go to the Philippines and you go to a movie, if you see a Hollywood movie in the theater, which there are plenty of theaters and Hollywood movies, it's in English. It's not dubbed or translated into Tagalog. In Singapore, there are 4 official languages. So English is very common in these countries. The expanding circle is basically the rest of the world, everywhere where English is learned as a foreign language. China, Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia. There are many theories related to world Englishes, and I'm not going to go into them. But we could look at here's world standard English, and then here's American standard. And in the United States, we have several varieties of English. We have Southern English, African American vernacular, Chicano English. Canada has different versions of English. If you go to in the Caribbean, different countries in the Caribbean have different varieties of English. And there's other models. You could look at the features of different Englishes. I'm not going to go into these, but that's part of what I studied in my PhD work. What I'm really interested in today, and what I want to talk with you guys about, is comprehending different accents. Most of us have spoken to somebody who has an accent. Actually, we all have accents. When we think about comprehending accents, we need to start with some general shared ideas. Like one, we all speak with a regional and social dialect or accent. We all vary our pronunciation, our word choice, and our grammar depending on the situation, right, who we're talking to. Two, there's something called speech accommodation theory, developed by Howard Giles since the 1970s. And he talks about, and research in this area since then, convergence over accommodation and divergence. And the most interesting thing is convergence. Take two people who speak in different ways and put them together. If they want to communicate, they will subconsciously each alter the way they speak to speak more like the other person. Their speech will converge in ways that they're sometimes consciously aware of and sometimes not consciously aware of. And so there's also times when they diverge, when someone wants to really express their identity through speech, they might maintain an accent or emphasize an accent that's different from the other person to express difference. But often, it's convergence, right? They come together. And one of the major factors is their attitudes, right? What they think about the other person and their attitude toward that accent or that person's ethnicity or their social class and the context. And there's a long tradition of research on accent discrimination. Listeners often evaluate second language users' accented speech negatively. There's a lot of research supporting that. So we're going to do a little bit of linguistic work. I'm going to teach you a little bit about Hong Kong English, the English widely used in Hong Kong. And so we're going to listen to a speaker a few times and try to train our ears a little bit to understand a different accent. And then we'll take a little test, not a real test, but then we'll try a different passage with some blanks in the transcript for you to fill in. So first I'm going to play the recording. So this is it's a female from Hong Kong. She's going to talk for about a minute, and we'll just listen once to kind of get a sense for what she's talking about. And then I'll give you the transcript of what she says, and we'll listen again. We'll identify some of the words that are pronounced differently and talk about them a little bit. And then we'll try a new passage and see if you've gotten better at understanding a different version of English. So let's listen first.
Well, I had a very similar experience like you. I would say that I was quite dumb when entering my secondary school, which is also an English school with English as the medium of instruction. Like you, I thought it was to me it's a terrible experience. I had 2 years in a row going to the assembly weekly, really without knowing what's going on, and I really lost confidence in myself. But like you, I have my headmistress, many teachers who are expatriates. There really was no choice for us to speak Chinese at all. And through that, well, maybe it's a forced situation, but I think that actually was the way I was brought up. Looking back, I thought the experience was in fact very positive to become a multilingual person.
I know that goes pretty fast, right? When I did this in my office, I was able to stop it and replay it little pieces. So did you notice were you able to circle any words that were a little bit, that do you think were pronounced differently?
Expatriates?
Okay, yeah, the word, how most of us would say, so people who go live in another country, they are?
Expatriate, wait, I don't know. Halfway there.
Yeah? Anybody else want to say it?
Exchange students?
Oh, well, but the word that's here. How would you pronounce that word? Expatriates. I think the typical American pronunciation would be expatriates. Her pronunciation was a little bit different, yeah. Okay. Anything else you noticed?
She said secondary and multilingual. Like, she said those two words funny.
Okay, a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I'm going to play it one more time. This time, what I want you to look at, actually, I'm going to tell you some words to listen for. It's about the third sentence, where the one that says, like you, I thought it was, the word it's, okay? And then in the next line, the word years, and the. In the next line, the word what's. In the next line, the word lost. In the next line, teachers. And we have expatriates. A couple lines later, situation, think. And in the last sentence, fact and person. Okay, so now listen again and pay particular attention to those words. So, did anybody recognize some patterns there? Yeah?
Was it when there was like an S and a T together?
So when there's an S and a T at the end of the word, what happens? The word what's comes out like what's, was. So the T, the T is dropped. So at the risk of people not knowing what I'm doing, I'm going to write it in IPA. What we would pronounce as what's is was. Okay. What about it's? The word it's? Is. Yeah, it was more like is instead of it's. Fact. Note. Fact. Fact. More like. More like fact.
Lost was like law.
Lost is more like loss. Loss. Law. So one very common feature of Hong Kong English is that final consonant clusters are reduced. So if there's consonant sounds that are in a row at the end of a word, often only the speaker will only say one of those sounds. And so one of them is just not pronounced. And there's various reasons for that that I won't get into. Also, the word person. Just what was going on with the words person, teacher, forced, and similar? The R is not pronounced. Person, teacher, forced, similar. Hong Kong English, due to the British influence, is non-rhotic. That means that, as in the UK, Hong Kong English speakers only pronounce the R if there's a vowel after it. So there's no vowel after these R's, so it's not pronounced. So these are systematic regularities in Hong Kong English. And then you also see in the words secondary. So in secondary, the R is there because it's followed by a vowel. But we would pronounce the word secondary with stress on the first syllable, secondary. Due also to some British influence, there's a vowel at the end that's dropped, and it's more like secondary. Instead of secondary, secondary, secondary. It's like British, instead of saying laboratory, they say laboratory, secondary. And same with expatriates becomes expatriates, expatriates. So, do those differences seem more apparent now? I hope so, right? With a little bit of explanation. So let's try. Go ahead and turn over your paper or go to page 2 if you have it. So I have another, it's the same speaker, and I want you to try to fill in the blanks with the missing words, and we'll see how you do.
Well, English as a subject to me is just like part of the game. You know, if you want to survive, if you want to like lead a a life that will allow you to move up the social ladder. When I was young, I already realized that you actually have to speak good English. Why I said so? Because I recall that I have many classmates who were very brilliant learners, great in arts, music, what have you, or Chinese. But only because my English was better. Again, looking back, I know that I have really a better life than what they have too. So to me, learning English is something I feel okay, but I also have a strong feeling of the fact that the language is always put in a political context. It's a sociological context. It actually means, at least in Hong Kong, something to do with your future. So students have to learn very diligently. When I have grown up, there's another observation I had, that is, being a multilingual person, I would say that learning English is not that political. In fact, I think it is also an element of respect of other people. As you said, English is really the language of communication these days, not only in workplace, but I think just as a person who have extensive international experience. English is the only language that you can speak and communicate people as the only common platform in the world.
Were there any that you missed? 16? Yeah, 16 was a difficult one. Who got 16? Anybody? Workplace, close. Yeah, which makes sense, right? English is really the language of communication these days, not only in the workplace, but that's a very Northwest American pronunciation, workplace. Any others that you missed? Did you get the rest? Yeah? I chose words that some of them were ones that were particularly difficult, where the accent was pretty strong. And so this is not my exercise. This is adapted from, you can see at the bottom, Dan Viorel, Ariel Loring, and Kate Evans. They used this activity as part of their course in World Englishes at UC Davis a few years ago. I met them at a conference and they gave this to me. So what does this exercise teach us about understanding people with accents? Yeah? Can it teach us anything? Yeah.
It actually kind of made me realize that some of the accent, after you were explaining the influences it had on her, the different type of English that she was learning, it kind of made me realize that I could hear other accents in it too.
Mm-hmm.
So it made me realize, I hear a little bit of like a British in that certain word, or something a little bit different. And so I was hearing different accents.
And so you could make connections, right? If you have some connection to some familiarity with maybe the British accents or dialects, you can apply that to this accent. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought that the context really helps.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to understand every word that's being said.
Right.
Because there's a limited number of words that would make sense.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but if I'm just listening to her notebook,
Mm-hmm.
it helps if I can read and read ahead.
That helps a lot.
That's not really about her accent. But
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm going to go on to some.
Can I ask one more question,
yeah.
Rob? The rhythm of the speech is also really different than what I'm used to hearing.
Right.
Is that also a thing?
That is a thing. We call it stress-timed versus. Boy, now I'm on the spot.
Oh, sorry.
Syllable-timed versus, I forget the other term. Anyway, some languages, like English is a stress-timed language, and so we have these alternating patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables, whereas many other languages have almost the same stress on every syllable. And so speakers, and this was true in Thailand, Thai is not a stress-timed language, and so Thai people tend to talk with every syllable stressed about the same, like this, right? And so it just kind of sounds like dun 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 dun, whereas English has a more pronounced stressed rhythm, okay? And so that'll come across in Hong Kong English, not the same stress patterns, yeah. So there's quite a bit of research on listening to accents, studied by Rubin and Smith in 1990, and this research has been around a long time, as you'll see from these dates. So in the study, they had college students listen to two different speakers. One had a slight accent and one had a very pronounced accent. But when students were, and they had different groups of students, right? So one group of students listened to a slightly accented speaker, and they were looking at a photo of a Chinese woman. Another group of students listened to a slightly accented speaker, and they were looking at a photo of an American woman. Another group of students listened to a speaker with a heavy accent, and they saw a photo of a Chinese woman. And then the fourth group had a speaker with also the heavy accent, but they looked at a photo of an American woman or Caucasian woman. It showed that ratings of the teaching ability and ratings of their comprehension were not affected by the degree of accent, but were affected by the perceived ethnicity of the speaker. In other words, if they saw a photo of a Caucasian woman, they both rated the teaching as better and they understood more, regardless of which recording they listened to. If they saw a photo of the Chinese woman, they rated the teaching as less good and they didn't understand as much. Same recordings. One of the same researchers 2 years later did a similar study, but this time he went one step further. He had 2 lectures recorded by native English-speaking Americans. Groups of college students listened to these recordings by native English speakers. Some of the students saw a photo of a Chinese woman, and some of the students saw a photo of an American woman, dressed almost identically, same context and everything. All of the recordings were by native English speakers with American accents. The students who saw photos of the Chinese woman comprehended less than those who saw the Caucasian photo. So there is definitely subconscious stereotypes that come to play when we listen to people with accents. And these are just 2 examples of a lot of research that has some of the same results. What they said is, listeners' perceptions of the instructor's accent, whether accurate perceptions or not, were the strongest predictors of teacher ratings. When students believed an instructor's accent to be, quote, foreign, they simultaneously perceived him or her to be a poor teacher. Also of particular interest, the best predictor of undergraduates' listening comprehension scores was the number of courses they had taken that had been instructed by non-native instructors. Those students who had persevered with their non-native English-speaking instructors had been rewarded by improved skill in listening to accented speech. So, kind of following up on that, there's a lot of research that shows that the more familiar you are with an accent that's different from your own, the better you get at hearing it. So what I'm getting at here is that communication is a two-way street. If you're speaking to somebody with an accent, it's partly the job of the person with the accent to speak more like the people in the place they're living, but it's also part of the listener's ears. You can learn to understand accented speech better. Both of these studies demonstrated that college students, both English native speakers and L2 users, are better able to understand accents that are similar to their own. So, some potential causes of difficulty in understanding people with accents. One, some L2 speakers are more difficult to understand than others. I mean, that's some people, if they're a language learner, or if they use a variety that is very different from yours, they may be more difficult. But native speakers should keep in mind that as a native speaker, you bring more linguistic resources to the conversation. It's a two-way street, okay? If somebody has an accent and they're speaking to you, you have more resources available than they do. Some native speakers deliberately choose not to understand accented speech, and it does actually require more cognitive effort to understand accented speech. I encountered this in Thailand a lot. I could speak Thai, conversational Thai pretty good. I would go to the market and typically, and I don't want to, stereotype, but typically it was an older Thai person selling things in the market. I would try to buy something, and there's always, you have to discuss price and how much and what kind and what's available. I would speak Thai, and they would look at me like I am speaking, an alien language. I would say the exact same thing to a younger person next to them, and they would understand me. So some native speakers when they see somebody who looks different or they start to hear an accent, they just assume they're not going to get it. And attitude plays a huge role in this. Some native speakers are subconsciously biased to speaker ethnicity, as we saw in those earlier studies. A general lack of familiarity with different accents creates trepidation in listeners that affects comprehension. There's a lack of confidence. And many second language users and many people with an accent report that when they speak with native speakers, they can sense that the people they're talking to are reluctant to talk with them because they're not used to their accent. And basically it comes down to a lack of confidence in the hearer. A more recent study, Druring, Roster, and Monroe, they took 3 groups of students who were in a community college program for social work. And one was a control group. They took a pre-test and a post-test on the ability to understand people with accents. The second group they called the familiarity group. They, once a week in their class, they listened to accented speech and they talked about issues that immigrants have with adjusting to new places. And then there's a third group they called the accent group. They practiced listening to accented speech, but also they did exactly what we did. They studied the actual phonological differences between the accents of the people they were studying and their own accents in order to see the regularities and the systematic patterns of difference. What was the result? The first group, the control group, they actually did better on the post-test. And the explanation that the researchers gave, which was very reasonable, I mean, it sounds kind of funny, but it's reasonable. Due to the fact that they took a pre-test asking them about to understand accents, they were more aware. And in the courses, it was a 10-week course in being a social worker. The course did cover a lot of immigration issues. They were more sensitive and they were more aware of people with accents. And they actually did better on the post-test. Their ability to understand accents improved. But the second group, the ones who did some practice listening, they both improved on the post-test, and in their self-reports of their ability to hear accents and their confidence and their willingness to interact with people with accents was vastly improved. The people in group 1 really didn't improve much in their confidence or willingness to interact with people with accents, but the people in group 2 improved a lot. The people in group 3 improved almost twice as much as that. Their confidence and their willingness to interact with people with accents was far higher than any of the other groups because of some once-a-week training. And there was an interesting note at the end of the article. The author said, 16 months after the data collection was completed, the social work instructor of the accent group received a telephone call from a student who had participated in the study. She reported having been the only member of an intervention team able to communicate with a Vietnamese woman in an elder abuse case. The former student attributed her success to the listening training she had received the year before. So, studying different accents and practicing listening to them may not actually increase your ability to hear accents that much better, but what it really does is it improves your self-confidence and your perceived ability. And remember, in these earlier studies, it's all about perception. How do we perceive people who are different? The less different we perceive them, the better we can understand them. So this is kind of a micro-linguistic way of talking about diversity and the importance of diversity and how we learn from each other, people who are different. So going kind of back to the bigger idea, universities, and it's not just Western, I think all universities, provide institutional spaces, places where people of very different backgrounds interact with common goals. And so we have these broad missions. You know, we have the mission and our values of community, diversity, and respect. We have learning outcomes, intercultural knowledge and competency, and those broad ideas are essential, because those affect everything below them. If you look at the faculty at Western, I helped with the committee I'm on conduct a survey last fall where we asked faculty about languages they speak and places they've studied and things like that. 60% of the people who responded, which we had a good number, 200 people responded to the survey. That's faculty and staff and administration. 60% of the faculty, 60% of everybody indicated some level of proficiency in a second language. 31% of faculty reported being skilled in 2 or more additional languages. Of faculty and staff, 31% of faculty and 25% of staff have studied abroad for usually 5 to 9 months. So a lot of the people who work here have studied abroad, and that we bring that to our classes. 60% of faculty reported extensive work, research, service, or residence abroad, with nearly half of those lasting more than a year. Remember, I said I came from Amity. I did my undergraduate work here at Western. This was where I really encountered people from very different places, mostly professors and some other students. So the fact that our faculty, and partly it's the nature of professors, our jobs are scarce. When we look for a job, we kind of have to go where there's an opening. Most people who work in a PhD don't do it in the state where they grew up. So working on a PhD, doing doctorate research often entails, right, a lot of movement and international work and collaborations. So a lot of faculty bring those experiences to classes. Even 37% of the staff at Western reported significant time abroad in 23 different countries. 31% of faculty collaborate regularly with international colleagues. 43% of the faculty who responded have presented their work at international conferences. So that's just, faculty and staff are just one element of global diversity at Western. International students, we have at this time about 250 international students at Western. We have had as many as 350 or so in the past. Even our domestic students, there's a range of diversity. I just read in the President's newsletter that as of in the February 2017 Chronicle of Higher Education, WOU is the top mainland university for Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students. So we have a very big population of Hawaiian and Pacific Island students. And if you go to the annual luau, you can enjoy their events. We also have coursework that is labeled as diverse. This is a list of departments that have diversity courses. So if you look in the course catalog, you'll see, Anthropology 350, D, ANTH 350D. The D is for diversity. You can see almost every department on campus has courses that are designated as diversity courses, and all foreign language courses, to keep with the linguistics theme, are diversity courses. You learn about people who are different. History. The history faculty, they went nuts. They really showed that they have a diverse curriculum. But there's courses that are not up here. I teach linguistics, and definitely in my linguistics classes, we learn a lot about diversity and understanding people with different languages, and we're not even labeled as diversity courses. So many courses entail studying globalized perspectives. We also have travel opportunities. We have about 50 or so students a year who travel abroad, who study abroad for anything from a summer program to a semester or a full academic year abroad. There are also shorter term service learning trips that are available. So any of you students who are interested, there are a lot of study abroad opportunities. Clubs and organizations, there's an international club. I should put in a little plug. This Friday, today's Tuesday, right? This Friday evening is International Night. The doors open at 5:30, program starts at 6:30. There are presentations from different student groups representing different countries. I've been here at Western since 2007. My wife can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've been at every International Night program. And for the first time ever, I'm going to be doing something at this year's International Night. I'm going to be singing the Thai Royal Anthem. A few months ago, the King of Thailand passed away. At that time, the world's oldest living monarch and longest reigning monarch. He's actually a wonderful ruler. So as a little tribute to the Thai King, I'll be singing the Thai Royal Anthem. We have a multicultural student union, which has many services that are not so much international, but reflect the diversity in the United States. We have a lot of cultural events. There's the annual luau, there's International Night. What am I missing? There's the what? The powwow. Nuestro, what's the Latino? Yeah, Nuestro Fiesta Latino. Many cultural events go on campus, even in terms of recreational sports. When I go to the Health and Wellness Center in the evening and I walk by the basketball court, I always see international students and domestic students there playing together. We have at least one international hall in the dorms. And I'll mention the Conversation Partners program. Raise your hand if you're a conversation partner this term. One. I know Aaron was, so I asked. This is a program that I've run for 4 years, and we match up volunteers who are international students and domestic students, and we partner them together for a weekly informal conversation. Here's some photos. So on the third week of the term, we have a big party where most of the partners meet each other, and we do some small group discussion and stuff like that. So anybody want to guess how many students? We do it every term, so it's new people every term. How many students do you think have been in the Conversation Partner this year at Western? Any guesses? 100? We broke a record, 230. 230, and that's typically, yeah?
How do you sign up for that?
How do you sign up? So, I didn't bring my flyers. I always send out an email in the first week of the term, and so it goes term by term. So in the first week, I send out an email. You can reply to cp@wou.edu. You say that you're interested, and then in week 2, I have an assistant, and we sit down and we match up all the partners. We look at people's schedules and their majors and things like that. And then in week 3, we all meet. And then after that, you kind of meet on your own. But for most people, it's a great program. International students have a chance to learn about campus, to make an American friend, and the American students have a chance to learn about someone from another country. And what it comes down to is it's that close interaction. And that's really my theme for today, is that if you want to understand diversity, you need close interaction. Just like if you want to understand accents, you need to practice. You need familiarity, and you need to pay close attention, and you need to be willing to interact with people who are different. So as a conclusion, toward the end of Dan Everett's article that I gave you, he says that, I think this is his last paragraph, "Diversity is the heart of success because it is the heart of learning. Without ensuring a flow of wisdom from strangers, a country chooses the comfort of sameness and predictability over the challenge of new ways of thinking and living. One thing that is similar across human populations is the set of problems we all have to solve: food, clothing, shelter, happiness. The power of diversity offers us inexhaustible sets of solutions to these problems. The wisdom of strangers can be learned only when we submit ourselves to differences, seek them out, and celebrate the perimeters of human experience." If you're in one of my classes, thanks for coming. And if you're not, thanks for coming. I hope you learned a little something about linguistics and also about diversity and globalization. Thanks. Thank you. Shukran. Kabkum krab. Sisi.